Welcome in, everybody. We are back with another episode of the Back Office following a long hiatus, and with week one of training camp in the books, it's time to talk all things Jaguars. Jeff, how's it going?
Excellent. Awesome to have football back in Jacksonville. The first week of training camp, of course, was filled with everyone getting super hype over little Twitter clips. And of course, there's lofty expectations surrounding the team. So the optimism, as per usual, amongst the yearly Jaguar fan cycle is at the peak of the chart. And we'll see how far that comes down. Hopefully not too far, but of course, everyone's very excited.
Yep, it's an exciting time to be a Jaguars fan. We finally have the big man on campus, and Urban Meyer, and a bunch of new faces, which we'll talk through today. Where should we start, Jeff?
Yeah, so let's just bring everybody up to speed, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. We'll touch on the defense specifically after we've seen some practices in full pads, and we really start to understand who's playing well and what things really look like once guys start hitting each other. So for today's episode, we will talk strictly the offense and kind of give you a preview of what to expect. We have some newcomers on the team from the spring's draft that we'll talk about a little bit. But overall, we just want to paint a visual of what we think this offense is going to look like with three different masterminds behind it. Of course, Urban Meyer is going to have his influence, Darrell Bevel, who has offensive coordinator experience coming over from Detroit, and then Brian Schottenheimer, who
quarterback coach.
Yes, quarterback coach. So three very interesting and dynamic offensive coaches that are going to put their heads together to create something special here.
Fantastic. So position group number one, I think we want to talk about the offensive line, right?
Yeah, you got to start with the big boys. And this position group is probably the most familiar to Jaguars fans. They will be returning all five starting offensive linemen from last year, which isn't comforting. Like normally that's a pretty comforting expression to use, like, oh yeah, they're returning the whole line, like so much chemistry going on. And one of the few coaches that they did retain is George Warhop, which was I think that says something because there's just been so much turnover throughout the entire organization. Really, Urban, putting his guys where he wants and creating exactly the kind of organization that he expects. But so yeah, what's your where's your barometer on the offensive line, considering we've already seen this unit work?
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I think under normal circumstances, the continuity is a huge plus. I'd say that, over the last couple of years, there hasn't been a ton of turnover on the line. We introduced Jawan Taylor at the start of last season, 2 seasons ago. And he's kind of been up and down. Cam Robinson, I think he's going into, the final year of his rookie deal with picking up the option. Also kind of an up and down player, had the injury earlier in his career and just haven't seen everything you need to give them a long-term deal, which is why they didn't. I think that the interior of the line is a bit more comforting and kind of in place than the tackles. I think the big question mark for this team from the offensive line standpoint is going to be the tackles.
Yeah, it's funny. The past few years, we have been so optimistic about these two young tackles. And unfortunately, we're finally starting to be honest with ourselves, but they still have some more growing to do. And the interior of the line, which features Andrew Norwell, Brandon Linder, and AJ Cann, all three guys on pretty nice contracts, specifically Andrew Norwell. We're often pretty hypercritical, specifically those two guards. However, if you look at their play grade, they're pretty good. League average, above league average, maybe. Brandon Linder is the superstar on the line. I think
absolutely.
ESPN did a players and coaches poll and had him as an honorable mention for the top 10 interior offensive linemen in the league, which would peg him at like number 4 or 5 for centers. So that's, to have a top 5 center on your team is terrific. So it, really comes down to can the whole unit, like they, this is Urban's thinking is that he has everyone has the physical attributes that they need. If they can take a step forward together as a unit under the direction of George Warhop, that we can have an above league average offensive line. So it makes me worried. I would have liked to have seen some of our resources spent towards the offensive line, but in Urban we trust, I suppose.
Yep. And the one notable addition obviously came in the draft in the third round in Walker Little, second round in Walker Little.
Pick 45 from the Yannick trade.
Pick 45. Yep. And was obviously a highly touted college tackle coming from Stanford. unfortunately, got hurt at the beginning of not last season, but the season before, and then had to sit out the season due to COVID. So a lot of big question marks. But I think if you go back and you look at the tape, there's reason to be excited about it. And I think that Urban and Trent Baalke in the early days of this new regime have seemed pretty comfortable with taking players in potentially opportunistic situations coming off injuries. You see the same thing with Andre Sisco, which we'll touch on the defensive portion. But so far, not to overemphasize this, but you would have thought a Marvel superhero had come to Jacksonville the way that the media is talking about Walker Little. So I think one of the really interesting dynamics of this camp is going to be to see what he looks like with pads on. So far, if you were just to listen into the radio guys, the hype train is at absolute peak. And I think that there's an overall feeling of, do we have another Baselli on our hands? But I think it's too early to know, but a really exciting thing to be watching. So I think if the big question mark's on the outside with the tackles, maybe there's a potential fit here with Walker Little.
It's certainly comforting knowing that, and this plan worked out really well for them. The franchise tag Cam Robinson. I think he is a league average tackle. He'll be a good guy to have on the team and make sure that Trevor has a injury-free first year. But it is comforting to know that position is locked up for the long term. Walker Little's a guy who we were intrigued by, and in our mock draft we took him, albeit much later in the draft. I think all the draft pundits had significantly discounted in their rankings the guys who opted out of their season due to COVID or had any kind of injuries. And, looking back at Trent Baalke, like you said, a history of trying to find, angles to approach the draft to be opportunistic. One being guys with injuries. He believes in the knee rehabilitation process. So he thinks that there's value there. And then in this specifically, unique draft this year coming off of the COVID season, he saw another angle. It was guys who decided to opt out, who, if they hadn't opted out, likely would have been
I would have gone higher.
Right. So he worked that angle on both Walker Little and Jay Tufele.
Yeah, he definitely, stuck to, the word that, and you already hit it a few seconds ago. The word he kept saying was value, 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 right? And he definitely let his actions do the talking. I think that could end up being a great pick. And if you think about like the offensive line, I mean, having a guy with less miles and more miles is probably a good thing. So if anything, maybe Walker Little sitting out for effectively 2 seasons ends up being a positive, but only time will tell. Anyway, I think that's a good overview of the line. Maybe moving on to the running back room.
Yeah, and one more note on the line that's going to transition us perfectly to talking about the running back room is I do think that this line is well positioned for run blocking. That will be a strength, of the two facets of the game. We probably should dig a little bit deeper into what kind of run blocking scheme Darrell Bevell runs, whether that is zone or man. But I do think that they've given Trevor a really great running game to they've laid
take the pressure off
there.
The passing game. Yeah, I totally agree. I think good teams build on their strengths, and last year, James Robinson in the rushing game was one of the very few strengths of the team. So I think that is really interesting to watch.
And James Robinson, of course, leading this running back room, they have always spoken positively about him, but leading up to the draft, they didn't really lean into him being the cornerstone of that side of the offense. So what did they do? They went out the 25th pick, took Trevor's running mate, Travis Etienne.
I think it was really smart. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Like, I think that they certainly were maybe not non-committal, but they definitely didn't, at least externally, message that like, he's a guy, like he's, what a talent we have. And I think post-draft, you've seen them talk a lot more about it. And part of that's probably draft positioning and making sure they were able to get a guy that they wanted. But I think if you look at around the league, the really dominant rushing attacks typically have 2 different running backs that have complementary strengths. And I think that's what we have now in Etienne and Robinson. I mean, I personally think that you're going to see the majority of the touches go to Robinson, at least, through the first half of the season in the rushing attack. But I think what Etienne gives you that we haven't really had on the team in a while is that kind of change of pace you can move the guy outside, like they've talked about playing him a lot at wide receiver. It opens up like the jet sweep game a lot more than I think we've had. And I just think the keeping people off balance as we try to establish the offense, especially early in games, I can't really think of a better dynamic to have than those two. So
Yeah, and I think that's a common theme that you're seeing Urban install on both sides of the ball is if you want to be a championship team, you have to be scheme diverse. You know, if you want to make a run through a playoff bracket, you're going to face teams that have totally different identities to them. So, you know, you're going to face teams that have the modern NFL identity where they're going to be really lean amongst their linebackers, they're really quick on their offense. And then you'll run into teams that, you know, like the Ravens do, are quite the opposite. So both sides of the ball are going to be able to do a lot of different things, and that's the only way that you can get through a playoff bracket is you have to be able to come one week and run the ball down someone's throat, and then the next week be able to, you know, juke their linebackers out of their shoes. You just have to be able to do it all. If you don't, then somebody's going to figure that out pretty early on, and you're going to run into a team that you just don't match up against well, and you get handed an L in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's other reasons to be excitement in the room as well. You know, Carlos Hyde being signed, obviously his second stint in Jacksonville. The first one, I'd say it was not even not memorable, but potentially kind of a head scratcher of a move. But he seems excited to be back, and I think, you know, God forbid anything were to happen to James Robinson during the season, but you know, he's kind of the same type of player. I'd say, you know, towards the tail end of his career, not going to put up the same production I think we can expect out of Robinson, but a nice, you know, kind of safety blanket if something were to happen. And then after that, you know, I'm not really sure who makes the team. I know there's a number of other running backs on the roster, but I think that'll be TBD until we actually see pads come on.
Yeah, Rock Armstead, who was on the team last year, was let go. That was a guy that we were always rooting for, but he got COVID and just wasn't good enough to stay on the team. Devin Ozigbo, another guy who's been on the team for a couple of years now, but somebody that I saw at training camp who really impressed. He was the first guy that was out on the field. I thought it was Chris Ivory for a second because he wears number 33 and he has dreads, but he looked really, really good. And that's Dare. His last name is
Bawale.
Oh yeah. All right, you're in charge of.
I'll help you out
that one. So yeah. I just I like that he was on the field, you know, first out of everybody after Urban, basically. That's something that Urban's been doing is he's on the field at like 8:30, and just like the presence that he is asserting on the team is awesome. But this guy looked really good in shorts, so someone to keep a close eye on.
Cool. Yeah. And I think they probably end up keeping 4, so maybe that's the guy. All right, what do we got next?
So spoke a little bit about the running game. Let's touch on the wide receivers, and this is probably the strongest unit on the team and certainly the most exciting. Everybody loves wide receivers, and so this is what really could take this offense to, you know, a top 15 offense in the league. Is the talent that we have at wide receiver, and it is a three-headed monster between DJ Chark, who is in the 4th year of his deal in his career. Laviska Shenault, who is in the 2nd year of his career, and then Marvin Jones, who is a 9-year veteran coming over from Detroit with Darrell Bevell. So 3 really interesting, very athletic, big wide receivers.
Yep. And no, you know, as of now, and I think this will kind of change as we get to see more, at least I'm excited to see more in this regard, is, you know, none of those 3 scream like true number 1 guy. You're going to see the defense have to react to that guy being on the field, at least as of yet, right? I mean, I think Jones is probably the closest in his career, but is, you know, admittedly a bit further on. Being a 9-year vet, probably isn't commanding the same type of attention as he did maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Though he's come off, I think, 4 consecutive seasons of 1,000 yards and close to double-digit touchdowns. So definitely not diminishing that he's a force to be reckoned with. I think he definitely is. But it'll be interesting to see, like, if somebody emerges as that guy, or if it really is, you know, catches by committee across all of them. And I don't know if there's one way that's better than the other for a young quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. Maybe it is a pretty even distribution. I think we'll talk about that some more, but those 2 are definitely really interesting. And then after that, I think you have even more kind of questions, right? You know, you have Colin Johnson returning, big 6'6" target. kind of could maybe used at some point as your joker move tight end. You've got Jalen Camp, who was drafted in the 6th round this year, who by all accounts early in camp looks incredibly athletic and could potentially be a huge difference maker for the team. You brought in Philip Dorsett, speedy guy, most recently played for the Colts. I don't have a great read on that yet. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And then Jamal Agnew, who seems to fit more of Urban's, special team specific player, was obviously a prolific punt and kick returner on the prior teams he was on. I'm not sure if I'm missing anybody, but you got a pretty wide basket of these guys. And lastly, Laquan Treadwell being signed in the last few weeks, hasn't played a whole lot the last few years, but coming out of college was very highly, regarded and talked about. So a lot of options there.
Yeah, and just to keep going along with the theme, that's exactly what they're trying to do. Is they want to be able to approach week to week, look at what a defense's weaknesses are, and we have a wide receiver that can do that.
Can attack that. Yeah.
So if they have little corners, we have Laviska Shenault, who's going to bully them. If they have big corners, we have Travis Etienne and potentially, Philip Dorsett to run circles around them. So
how many do you think they're going to keep out of that group? We just named 6 or 7 guys.
It'll probably be 5 wide receivers and then Jamal Agnew, which I think Jamal Agnew can do a lot
in the receiving game as well.
Yeah,
just hasn't really been used that way a lot. Yeah,
that was definitely some of the retail that was coming out after we signed him in free agency. Is that he is certainly not just a punt and kick returner. Although haven't heard his name a lot in camp. I think he might be a little banged up right now, so something to watch to see if he gets any reps at wide receiver. But talking about the 3 guys that are really going to make or break that room, which is so interesting. Like, I think all 3 of them have a similar ceiling of talent or ability of talent. Certainly Marvin Jones has flashed and he just looks so polished because he's a veteran. But he and Trevor already seem to have that connection to where, like, when Trevor needs to fall back on somebody, and this is a characteristic of a true number 1, but it's going to be Marvin Jones, because he's a guy who has an incredible catching radius, incredible body control. He and DJ share a lot of similar qualities, but the ability to get contested catches and control your body on the sideline and keep your feet in bounds. And the way that Trevor throws guys open, putting the ball up in, the catch window, that's something that he and Marvin already seem to have a ton of chemistry with. So I'd expect a really big year out of Marvin Jones. But from everything that you hear and read, so far in training camp, people are just buzzing over Laviska Shenault.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild. You would have thought that that he's already been to 4 or 5 Pro Bowls the way he's been talked about, which is super exciting to see that all come together. I think thus far in camp, given everything we've been able to read and see and hear from the media, it definitely seems like the acquisition of Marvin Jones was very smart, right? You brought in a guy that has a lot of experience, like you said, the ability to go up and get contested balls. And the chemistry, like you said, it already seems to be there. I thought it was super cool, and I know we're going to touch on Trevor later, but that the 3 of them and Trevor Lawrence went up to Clemson and worked out for a couple of days together. I just think that room seems to be kind of cohesive at a point in time where you wouldn't necessarily expect that from a rookie quarterback. And 2 wide receivers are on the team last year who are young themselves, and a vet that got brought in from very far away. It's just gonna be really interesting to see that come together. I think that room has the ability to really exceed expectations from outsiders. I think people who follow the Jaguars are already really excited, which is cool.
Yeah, and what everyone's saying about Laviska is that he has added speed this year. And last year he was effective, but you really thought of him as like a wide receiver who ran like a running back.
It was yards after catch, like he just running people over.
Yeah. He ran like he wanted it, like the turf had done something to him. Like, he was ripping it up underneath his feet. And this year he looks like smooth. Seeing him cut in and out of breaks, he looks like a polished wide receiver, and that's scary because if he can start creating separation, with his routes as opposed to just like bodying people up.
Yep.
He's going to be a really dynamic receiver. I think Marvin Jones is the guy that you see like every third down, just like catch a ball, on a 5-yard out, and he and Trevor look like they've been doing it for like 10 years together.
Yep.
And then I think Laviska is the guy that has those 150-yard games that you're just like, this guy can't be stopped right now. Like this matchup is just too much for this opposing defense. And then you have DJ Chark, which DJ Chark we've been flirting with this idea of, is he a true number one or not? Should we pay him now since his contract is about to expire before he hits his huge epic season with Trevor Lawrence, and he prices himself out of our budget? But it's been pretty quiet from him so far in camp, and that might just be because there are two other shiny toys that we don't talk about enough. But it makes me a little worried. So I'm glad that we're waiting to pay DJ. I think he ultimately could get a little bit overshadowed in this wide receiver room.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way early in camp. I mean, there was a lot of talk kind of as camp started about how impressed the team officials, specifically Urban, was to kind of the call to action of, hey, like, last season you weren't nearly physical enough. We need more physicality out of you, DJ. And him coming into camp a lot bigger, a lot stronger, a lot faster. But yeah, it's been quiet. You've heard tons about Viska, tons about Marvin Jones, and DJ doesn't seem to be getting as much airtime. So it'll be interesting how that kind of unravels as we get into the part of camp where the DBs can actually break on the ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's going to be special, though. All three of those guys can track a deep ball so well and Trevor Lawrence throws such an accurate deep ball that they all share common characteristics, but I'm probably not smart enough to be able to really describe what makes them different. But they're both athletic. All three of them are athletic freaks. So it's something really to be excited about.
Yeah, it'll be fun. All right, tight ends. I think from my vantage point, I'm not sure if you agree, this is just a huge question mark. I think a lot of Jaguars fans, and I'd put myself in this camp, at least as of right now, a little bit surprised and maybe a little bit frustrated that there wasn't a bigger signing as it relates to the tight end room. Part of that could be that they feel so good about the wide receivers, plus the clear indication that ETN is also going to kind of play a hybrid wide receiver role, that maybe this offense just kind of revolves more around those position groups, the wide receivers and running backs, than it does around tight end. The one notable acquisition, in free agency at least, was the addition of Manhertz, who by all accounts, and you can comment better than I can because you went to camp last week, is far more athletically gifted outside of blocking than he was kind of portrayed as in the process. I think that all we heard was, yeah, this guy's basically a swing tackle and he's going to come in and manhandle people in the run game. But, if you look at him, at least in pictures and video, seems a lot more smooth, a lot more athletic, not just a power forward, which I think is kind of how he's been characterized thus far. So I think that's really interesting. We drafted Luke Farrell late in the draft. That's another interesting one. Obviously has a history with Urban Meyer, being recruited to Ohio State. Kind of a similar story as Manhurts. It's very much more, this guy's a blocker, not going to create a ton of separation. He also got taken in the draft ahead of some guys that we had talked about that maybe were a bit more of a receiving threat.
There's a lot of buddy in the tight end room. Which makes me nervous.
For sure. And then, then you've got kind of the mainstays, at least over the last couple of years. You got James O'Shaughnessy coming back. I know he was held out of camp a couple of days last week. It seems like nothing serious. And I think they even announced that he'll be back on Monday. So it'll be interesting. He's always had really great rapport with Gardner. So, I'm interested to see how that develops with Trevor. Then you've got Ben Ellefson, who got called out specifically by Darren Bevel last week around how good of shape he came into camp in. Which is interesting. You got Tyler Davis out of Georgia Tech, who, again, like always talked about in the draft process as a blocking tight end. Had a few touchdowns at Connecticut before he transferred to Tech, but while he was at Georgia Tech, really didn't catch a lot of balls. And then finally, the ultimate question mark, Tim Tebow, who I did see had a big touchdown catch the other day in red zone work with Lawrence. So, and got a bunch of hoots and hollers from the fans. So, yeah, overall, like a lot of pieces, a lot of unknown. It's interesting.
Well, not to add to your anxiety about how they're going to use the tight ends, but unfortunately, or maybe this will be a good thing, but apparently from camp, there have been a lot of two tight end sets. And so when you're using two tight ends, you have your Y tight end, which is going to be your inline blocker, who might block and leak out for a pass, but they're not trying to stretch the field or run any kind of complicated route. And then you have the F tight end group, which is going to be a tight end that's more their blocking responsibility is probably just like a chip block, and then they're out there to be a receiver. So I heard when Tyler Bowen, the tight end coach, was talking to the group, they do have specified Y group and F groups.
Interesting.
So every one of those tight ends has been boxed into one of those roles. And I would expect a lot of those formations this year, which it feels like a crime when you could have all three of those wide receivers out there, or I guess you could
plus two all three,
or have two running back sets. So it would be a shame to see a lot of Chris Van Hertz and James O'Shaughnessy on the field with a guy like Laviska on the bench. But we'll see. Heard a lot of good things about O'Shaughnessy as well. But Van Hertz definitely looks like he can move. In no way did he looked like one of the more athletic guys of the group, which is a good thing. But yeah, we'll see. I think a tight end outside of really the top three in the league, or top four, a tight end is really molded by the offense that they play in and the quarterback that they play with. So, I think you can get production out of that position without necessarily having any kind of
the most acclaimed guy. Yeah. No, I think that'll be a storyline to watch, because I think it'll also kind of evolve as the season goes on. And for now, it makes sense to have a lot of them in camp. I mean, I don't see a scenario where they keep more than four. I think most teams keep three, and maybe you position someone, wink, wink, as more of a fullback or a Swiss Army knife kind of guy. And I think that we both know who might fit in that role, given this coaching staff. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of came into camp a little bit, not frustrated, but quizzical, if you will, around where were their collective heads at when they put this together? Because to your point a minute ago, I mean, it does seem like on the surface they're all kind of the same guy, with maybe the exception of O'Shaughnessy, and then Tebow's his own thing because he's never played the position. But the idea that they are kind of segmenting them into these two different categories is interesting, and that's why these guys get paid a lot of money to assess talent. It's they have a vision for it, and they've seen a lot more of it than the observer has. So again, in Urban we trust. Let's give them a pass until we get to see it.
Yeah, it's definitely promising to see O'Shaughnessy already back to form. He has looked really athletic in camp, and he's coming off of an ACL injury. So that's great, and I'm really excited to see Chris Van Hertz from the Pats go on, because you just look at those 6 or 7 guys. They warmed up right in front of the stands when we went to training camp, and you look at all those guys, and they all look like gym rats, just regular 6'3" to 6'5" gym rats. And then there's Chris Van Hertz, and you're like, whoa. So if he can find his stride as a receiver, I think that could be a really nice acquisition for us.
Yeah, 100%. All right, and we're finally here. The
moment you've been waiting for. The Crown Prince.
There's a new face of the franchise. His name is Trevor Lawrence. Thank you, New York Jets. We are quite appreciative. I think so far the Jets fans, at least the ones that I'm aware of, are a little bit bummed in the relative trade between who they ended up with and who we ended up with. But yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying. I know there's been a lot of talk that we've got a camp battle between Gardner and Lawrence. And don't get us wrong, Jeff and I are the two biggest Gardner fans on the face of the earth. But I don't think it's much of a battle. I mean, you pick this guy number one. He's looked the part so far. I think it's smart that they're getting both reps with both the ones and the twos. But I think as soon as pads come on and the offense is really going from kind of installation phase to execution phase, there's a clear number one quarterback on the roster. And that's the first time we've been able to say that in a long time. So it's
Yeah,
very exciting.
they played their games with Trevor the first day and gave Gardner 27 reps with the ones, and left Trevor get back
In the
getting
teens
getting
somewhere,
like
yeah.
13 or 14. So they played some mind games there with the rookie the first day, but it's just undeniable the way he throws the ball. It is something special. He's looked really poised in camp so far. Just as a professional altogether, he has just made every right move, and he hasn't really opened up entirely who is advising him. I know he talks to Peyton Manning a good bit, but I think that's a really good comparison for him, at least as a person.
So I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So he's done all the right things. He's saying all the right things, and he's so far, at least in shorts, is doing all the right things.
Yeah, and I think you've heard like the little sound bites you get from the players when they're asked about him. Obviously, it's a huge topic, kind of from an inbound standpoint, an outbound standpoint from the players. You get very small comments here and there, but I think that while he's a little bit not necessarily soft spoken, but maybe reserved a bit with the media and stuff so far, I don't get the sense that that's true in the locker room. I think that he's a very vocal leader, and you saw it, like we already talked about it, so I don't want to hit it too much again. But the fact that he took his 3 starting wide receivers, or presumably the starting wide receivers, up to Clemson to work out as a rookie, like I think that's super cool. I think that shows you that there's he knows how to build, that camaraderie and those relationships early, and that's what matters, right? Like you're not going to make it deep in the playoffs if you don't have rapport with all your guys. So I'm super excited to watch that continue to develop, and him kind of becoming the actual face of the franchise. He obviously is, but kind of to own it, if you will. I think that's super cool. We haven't been able to do that in a while. So, but yeah, no, I think the battle's all but over. Again, love you, G. But also, might as well hit on that though. Like, I don't think Gardner's going anywhere. I think the fears that we were going to ship him off for picks, either we didn't get a good enough offer, or they realized pretty early on, like, oh, this guy, he's not only a serviceable backup quarterback, but he's actually like a pretty fringe starter for a lot of other teams. And given the right opportunity, he may actually shine. So I think having somebody like that as insurance, at least for the short term, makes a ton of sense. So I hope they keep him around, because I love me some Gardner.
Yeah. Although because he has performed well in camp, his issue is once he's under any kind of duress, his mind just like fritzes out. But if he continues to look pretty good in camp, considering the challenges that the NFL is facing this year, this season, and just the natural progression of how injuries happen, I do think that there's going to be plenty of opportunities to send him off for some kind of compensation.
In the future,
if they don't, really care much about having a solid, backup quarterback. Although I think Gardner does kind of stand out from the other 2 guys, Beathard and Luton. But like, for example, what happened yesterday with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins isn't vaccinated. He's being $45 million against the cap this year, and somebody in the QB room gets COVID because he's not vaccinated. He has to go through different protocol. He's going to miss the next 10 days. And like, that is just huge for their team. And
look at what happened with Wentz too. Wentz is already banged up. If they sent Gardner to Indy, though, I'd lose my mind. So please, Urban, don't send him to Indy. But yeah, you're already seeing it. Like, I mean, if it's not COVID, it's injuries, and yeah, I mean, I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense to keep Gardner on this roster. And Beathard, he's owed a decent amount of guaranteed money. I think it might even be $5 million. I mean, it's a decent chunk of change. Luton's obviously super cheap. I think one of those guys, they'll make it through waivers and put them on the practice squad, and we'll keep 3 effectively. But I think your 2 on week 1 or T-Law at QB1 and Gardner at QB2. So
yeah. But back to Trevor, there's going to be all this hype about, how great he's playing and stuff. We're going to find out a lot more next week once, as you mentioned, the defense can not only start hitting, but they can actually make plays on the ball. So you see these like outrageous stat lines from Trevor. A lot of those balls would have been broken up or intercepted. So let's not get too excited.
Too ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, Trevor has provided honest evaluations of himself, both Trevor and Urban, and it's been good, but obviously room for improvement. The biggest thing in my mind for this offense to work, because there are so many playmakers, it's just, and this has been my biggest worry all offseason, is we're bringing back the same 5 dudes that we saw last year, and it's really placing a ton of blame on Gardner. It's a full indictment of the reason the offensive line didn't work is because Gardner Minshew can't see over the effing line. And he has to scramble to, as soon as any kind of pressure is made. So, but if you give Trevor Lawrence time in this offense, oh my goodness. I mean, the guy can go through 3 or 4 reads in a very quick progression. You just give him the time to be able to plant and make throws, and it's going to be a really fun offense to watch.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I think that's the, if you're thinking about building this roster into hopefully something resembling a dynasty over the next 10 years, I think what you care about early is that the offense is starting to click. And sure, there's going to be places where we're going to have to plug holes next year. It's not totally built, right? I think, hitting definitely the offensive line, it still remains a big outstanding question for everybody. But if the offense starts to click early, I think it's a really good indication that we're on the right path. So it's going to be really fun. I can't wait.
A question for you. Vegas has Trevor Lawrence's passing yards at 4,150. So if you had to divvy up those, let's call it 4,000 yards, where
are they going?
Yeah, where do you think it's going to be spread around the offense?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And I've got a calculator for you, so just go ahead and rattle them off.
Keep me honest. Let's see. I could see. I think Marvin Jones is going to be a 1,000-yard guy. I'm going to actually go a little bit above that, though. I'm going to say Marvin Jones leads the wide receivers with 1,200 yards, which would be a big season. But I think for all the points you laid out, at least early on, it seems like that's where Trevor's head's going, right? Now the split, starting with the wide receivers, and then we can go to the other groups, but the split between Viska and DJ Chark, I think, is really interesting. I think you've kind of echoed in the past when we've talked offline that, maybe Chark is your third guy, which is crazy to me given how good of a season he had 2 seasons ago. Obviously, last year was a huge step backward, but I think I'd give a slight nod to Viska. I think he's probably also, let's give him, I think, 900 yards. So now I'm at what, 2,100?
1,900.
1,900. No, because I said 1,200 for MJJ.
Yeah, we're going off 4,000 yards total.
No, I know, but I'm saying the total as of now is 2,100, right? Okay. I've given away 2,100 yards.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so then Viska, Chark, I think 600. So now we're at 2,700. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Chark could. I just don't see 3 guys getting close to that 1,000-yard mark, and I think that the flip is going to be between Viska and Chark. And thus far in camp, I think that all indications would be that Viska kind of has the leg up in that. Then I think they've made it super clear that ETN is going to get a bunch of touches, at least in the receiving game to start, and probably as the season goes on, take some of the carries away from Robinson. I'm going to give him. I think at Clemson last year, he had 500 yards, roughly speaking. I'm going to give him 500. So what are we at now? So I got 2,100 plus the 600 for Viska, 2,700. So we're at 3,200 yards. So I got 800 to give away. Mm-hmm. This is the wacky part. I bet you get another 200 receiving from James Robinson. And then I think the remainder gets split between O'Shaughnessy and Manhurts. I think those are the 2 last kind of recipients. What do you think? Did I kind of hit all? I think I hit the major buckets.
Yeah, most definitely. No, you did that perfectly. I agree with it. Barring injury, of course. I think DJ could be. I don't know. It's been really interesting to see how it all flashes out. I'm curious to see where Trevor gravitates towards, and that's why I think Marvin Jones, I would agree, would be the number one guy, and Visca number two. But it certainly will be fascinating. And I think week to week, you'll see guys receiving totals dramatically different
Shift around.
change.
Yeah.
Especially as just, whatever the matchup calls for, that's, what we're going to deliver against opposing defenses. So you'll see things fluctuate and ebb and flow.
Yeah, and what a welcome! I know we've already kind of hit on this, but what a welcome change that is. That it's not like we're running our scheme and they're reacting. It's like, no, let's actually play offense in the truest sense of the word, right? Like, let's put a defense on their toes, and they've definitely done at least an adequate, but probably a great job once the season plays out and we look back on it, of putting those different kind of chess pieces together so that you can't just fit us into one box, right? I mean, I think there's a couple different looks that you can see from this team, and again, assuming that the quarterback, no matter who it is, has time to deliver the football. I think that's the kind of the one thing that makes this whole thing more tenuous is, like, if the tackles, no matter who it is, can't give him time, it's a bit shakier, I think. So, but
yeah,
that's why we have Pats coming on next week and we get to see how the line plays. So
yeah, back to your point, just about it being so refreshing to have flexibility within the scheme. Something that Darrell Bevel said in an interview recently was that somebody asked them about, what can we expect out of your offense? And he was very quick to say, well, it's not my offense. I have the concepts that, I feel comfortable with. And, a lot of the logistical things and verbiage and stuff from the offense is carried over. But certainly Urban and Brian Schottenheimer have, their say in adding to the playbook. But specifically, his goal is to mold this entire offense around the players that we have. And so, like, you're already seeing things. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but I saw in practice a jet sweep to Laviska early in practice, and that was something that we figured, okay, well, that's something that he does really well. Go and make a corner, try and tackle him.
In the open field. Yeah.
So things like that, where the offense is going to be tailored to the guys that we have, and I think that means a lot of really deep passing concepts with DJ and Marvin, and a lot of just getting the ball to Laviska and letting him play make with it. And I think the same goes for Travis Etienne.
Okay. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Yeah.
Well, any last thoughts? That's a lot about the offense, and of course, we'll have a lot more insight to share. But I think that's at least from the information that we have now, the best that we can kind of project for what to expect this season.
No, I think we've hit all the major points. I'm gonna put you on the spot as a preview for when we talk about the defense. Pads are coming on Monday, tomorrow, as of this recording. Before we see anything at all, like, who's the one guy you're most excited to see on the defense?
On the defense, yeah, it's tough, but I'm really excited about Roy Robertson Harris.
That's a good one.
It was the one, like, name brand defensive lineman that we got in free agency. And so I'm really excited to see what he has to do, because in Chicago, it seemed like Chicago fans were really upset to have lost him. So he could be a budding star. So I'm definitely excited. I'm nervous, but excited to see what he can bring to the defensive line.
No, I think that's a really good one, and in a name that I don't think a lot of people have been talking about him yet as to how important that probably is. I think if that acquisition would be, a less than good acquisition, I think the defensive line is kind of in a weird, precarious position. I'm gonna stick same theme, move it outside. I think this one's easy too. I'm giving Josh Allen a bunch of benefit of the doubt that he's going to kind of return to form. Maybe he's not a 13 sack guy this season or something like that, but I want to at least see him get the numbers back up to where they were when he had more of a complimentary pass rush around him, which makes my number one to watch, which I think is pretty easy. I think Chason, like, if he can develop into somebody that, moving him back to his more natural position as a 3-4 backer instead of having his hand in the dirt, if we can see some of the flashes of what you saw at LSU, I think that the whole thing kind of starts to fit together a little bit better. I think without that, I don't know where the pass rush is going to come from outside of that kind of coming together. And so that's what I want to see is how he looks in that role. And then beyond that, I think just overall, I think the defense is way more, what is this going to look like than the offense. I think, if you were to pick, what do you feel pretty good about? I think everybody would say the offense. So I'm excited for our episode next week.
Yeah, same. I think we'll have a lot of good insight to share, specifically Joe Colin's scheme that he's rolling out. What is that going to look like? What's the rotation going to look like? What is the depth chart? How does it start to stack up? Because there's a lot of names in the shuffle. So will be really interesting to see how it all shakes out. But yeah, I would agree. You'll probably be able to keep up and get more answers to questions, keeping an eye on Caleb on. Because he is such an important piece of the puzzle. And in training camp, they do those one-on-one drills with the tackles. So it'll be really fun to see him going up against, both starters.
Taylor and C-Rob. Yep, and Superman himself, Walker Little.
Yeah. Walker Little, I want to get excited about him. And we were on the beat early with him. So we were both when he first got drafted, we were like, ooh, that was a reach because, in all our rankings we've seen and simulators that we've done, he's a 6th round or 5th round pick. But then there's obviously a disconnect there. And so a lot of the league praised the pick. But seeing him walk around, he's a little bit loafy. He doesn't look like the most, of course he's 6'7", so you can't miss him, but he does look a little loafy. But then once you turn on the tape, he moves so smoothly.
Yep.
So I think he has a little bit of growing up to do still, which is why I am perfectly fine cashing our check on Cam Robinson and putting the mileage on him for this year.
Yeah.
Because
let him duke it out. Yeah.
I don't think there's that significant of a talent difference. But certainly I think a year in this new conditioning program and player development program that Urban's put together, which he continues to harp on as such an important element of success for the organization.
Yeah.
I think all these guys, one more year or one full year in the program, and you're going to see a lot of guys
develop
and achieve their potential. But James Robinson is a guy though that, and you were the one who really told me this, and I saw it too on Twitter. Certainly a guy who has come in and looks even more impressive athletically. So that's really exciting. If he's going to take a step forward, we're going to have a really nasty running duo.
Yeah, totally. I'm super excited for him. I think I kind of like the fact that he got kind of snubbed at the end of last year, kind of across the board. I mean, he didn't get the kind of recognition I think that he probably deserved, and so I think he's coming in with a bit of a fire, which is, I think that's what you want.
He's a super nice guy, and all his interviews, he's been so cordial, and he and Travis are definitely type B kind of guys. They're quiet, both insanely talented. You'd expect them to be cocky as hell, but they're both very, very quiet, reserved dudes. And so James Robinson just has a smile on his face. If I'm him, I am I have to be pissed off. You kind of go underappreciated. The coach doesn't really say a lot about you early on in this, in the process. And then they go and draft a guy to take carries away from you. And you're making the least amount
of a huge year.
Yeah. And you're making the least amount of money on the team. I mean, that's got to be a really tough position to be in. But, I don't know. Urban is, he definitely knows how to pull the psychological strings on guys. And I'm sure, for example, he's been picking on DJ Chark all camp. DJ Chark had a drop that it was a ball thrown right at his face at point blank range, and he didn't catch it. Very tough catch. But afterwards, Urban was chirping him "Hey DJ," chirping him. So that's a guy that Urban is really trying to. Another guy who physically has already added a ton of muscle, which he needed to. But yeah, Urban's playing games with guys, and I love it.
Yep, I think that's a good place to end it. Urban and mind games. Well, this was so fun. Welcome back, Jaguars fans. This is gonna be an awesome next month until we get to see them on the field for real. Kickoff week 1 is what, 40 days away, 45 days away. Wild. We're back, baby.
We're back. So yeah, we'll catch up with you guys in a week or two with some analysis on the defense. But thanks for tuning in. If you're still with us, go Jags. And this has been the back office.
Oh.
Duval.